Hey all, just a quick edit before the video starts. This is a new format. I wanted to go over the top performing uniques in the league, both in trade and in solo self-found. If you'd like that to be separated into two separate videos in the future, definitely let me know that down in the comments section below the video. Also, apologies for the bad lighting here. I'm trying to fix that, but it's not going to be fixable in the short term. Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some part of Exile discussion. Today, we're 3 weeks into the Expedition League, and I wanted to have a look at some of the higher performing unique items across the league. So I'm going to look at uniques based on 3 different categorizations. The first one is items that are just really expensive in Trade League. This doesn't necessarily mean that they're super good. It just means that there's more demand than there is supply of the items. So something that's extremely, extremely rare, like the unique green Angler's Plate, could make it onto this list, even though it's not got any real use in terms of it making your character any stronger. Or at least nothing that's been publicly divulged. People who know the deal of fishing are being quiet about it. After that, we'll have a look through the items that are being widely used in trade-enabled softcore. And after that, we'll have a look at the items that are being widely used in hardcore solo self-found. Obviously, hardcore solo self-found and trade-enabled softcore, there are things in between that. You can have one of those conditions without the other. But I'm going to have a look at the 2 extreme ends. And then, you know, if you're in one of the in-between leagues, like trade-enabled hardcore or softcore solo self-found, then you can take bits from each of them. So, you know, you might, for instance, see that there's very few people in hardcore solo self-found that are using items that drop from the Maven, because the Maven is a very hard encounter to survive in that game mode. But if you're in softcore solo self-found, you might be confident that you can beat the Maven. So with that in mind, let's go through, firstly, the items that are really expensive in Trade League. So firstly, from a weapons perspective, it's really only Paradoxica once you remove all of the items that are expensive because of their links. So for instance, you have something like Atzeri's Rule. No one 6-links this. It doesn't actually benefit from a 6-link. So the small number of them that are on the market that are 6-linked can be quite expensive. Likewise, things like Disintegrator that are pretty rare items, but generally speaking, most of the value in them is their links. So we'll get rid of that. We'll only consider the 1 to 4 link items, and it really is just Paradoxica. Paradoxica is best in slot for a lot of builds that are using a one-handed weapon. These builds often use the Savior in their offhand, but there's more copies of the Savior around than there are Paradoxicas that are good. So yeah, Paradoxica, very, very good item. Huge degree of variance on unveiling Paradoxica though. You can spend a lot of currency on a Paradoxica, then unveil it and get absolutely nothing. So do keep that in mind. On the flip side, a Paradoxica with amazing mods can be worth dozens and dozens of Exalted Orbs. Next up, we'll jump across to the unique armors, and the clear winner of everything here is Replica Forbidden Shaco. I did a video on this recently, and it's just one of those items that's super powerful and that got better with the support gem nerfs in 3.15. The reason it got better is that a number of one of the things about Forbidden Shaco that sometimes held it back a little bit was that you could run a 6-link, and often a 6-link could be competitive with Replica Forbidden Shaco, but Replica Forbidden Shaco now sort of pulls ahead a bit, because it's actually a 5-link. You might have a level 33, 34, or 35 support gem, one of the supports that scales wildly with gem level. So for instance, if you had Replica Forbidden Shaco with socketed gems that are supported by level 33 Ice Bite, and also that had socketed gems are supported by something like Blasphemy that doesn't do anything here, that's going to end up in a situation where you're using a 5-link, but the 5th link, this level 33 Ice Bite, is worth 2.5 to 3 support gems. And so because of the mana changes, Replica Forbidden Shaco is in a better position than it was last league, and it's one of the best items in the game now. It's certainly not for every build, but for the builds that it's good on, it is amazing, and this is something like 1 in 1,000 heist curio chambers. So that means about 1 in 5,000 chance for any given curio to have it, I think. Something like that. It's a very rare item, it's a very good item, and it's something that, is definitely something should be on your radar if you've got a lot of currency to burn. Replica Farrell's Fur and Replica Shroud of the Lightless are next. You'll notice there's a lot of heist items here. This is a case of supply being insufficient to meet the demand. The rarer heist items are just much rarer than something like an Uber Elder unique that's at the rarer end there. Whereas Uber Elder, its rarest unique is Eternity Shroud, and I think the Eternity Shroud might be like a 2 or 3% drop rate. Some of these are less than 1/10 of 1%. Replica Shroud of the Lightless is similar, super, super powerful item, and it's in a worse place than it was last league, and that's why it's cheaper than it was last league. That's because of some of the changes to accuracy stacking. One thing that's really surprising here is Crown of the Tyrant. Crown of the Tyrant is an all drop, but so all the Crystal King, but that normally has very little value late in the league. I'm surprised to see it so expensive this late in the league. It is a very good item in very narrow circumstances, but there's only a couple of people using it on very high level characters. So I'm quite surprised to see this maintaining such a price. Crest of Desire is also quite expensive. This got a lot better with 3.15 as well. Again, it's just something that with the nerfs to support gems, the opportunity cost of using Crest of Desire came down a lot, and that's made this really good. Asenath's Gentle Touch is the most valuable of the drop anywhere uniques that are not Headhunter, and that's because it's very rare. It's tier 1 rarity, and it used to be a Legion exclusive drop. That's no longer the case. It is now drop anywhere. It's the same rarity as Rizlatha's Coil, and it's something that you probably won't see very often, but if you do, it's a huge hit. Also, interestingly, I think this can drop as low as item level 25, so I think it's something that you can get from very early in the game, but in practice, it's probably going to be something that most players will not see because it is legitimately very rare. In terms of incursion items, we have Slave Driver's Hand is coming in as a fairly high up item on the list. This one's interesting in that this was super hyped at the start of the league. A lot of popular streamers were playing Ice Trap. And then Ice Trap, it's like the build has worked. It's just that it's not excelled the way people expected it to, whereas Spectral Shield Throw has excelled. And so a lot of people who were considering playing Ice Trap have instead gone over to Spectral Shield Throw, and those people have sold off their Slave Driver's Hand. So that's pretty much everything there. Viridi's Veil from the Maven is falling, but this is a very high drop rate item. So it's the sort of thing that's got a lot further to fall. It's just that it is such a good item. And there's also just a lot of players that can't beat the Maven yet. Having a look over at the unique accessories, we obviously have Headhunter at the top, best item in the game for a reason. We then have a Replica Bated Breath, which is a meme item. This is just purely here for its extreme rarity. But it is just one of those funny items that will be very expensive all through the league. This is believed by a lot of players to be sort of 5 to 10 times rarer than any of the other rare replicas. So that means that it might be something like 1 in 10,000 grand heists that are replica uniques will have one of these in it. They do drop, they're just very, very rare. Coward's Legacy is the top of the incursion items. So Coward's Legacy is a unique belt that is absolutely incredible on any build that is willing to deal with being cursed with vulnerability. And the best way to deal with being cursed with vulnerability is to curse yourself with vulnerability via the unique chest Soul Mantle. And so this is a really popular high-end upgrade for a lot of builds that are playing around with Soul Mantle. And that's basically Forbidden Rite Totems is the top totem build this league. So a lot of the builds that are running Forbidden Rite Totems, Coward's Legacy is their sort of high tier upgrade that they're going for. If you do get this item, it'll have 5 to 10% increased movement speed by default. You definitely want to divine that to 10 and quality it to 12 because that mod is really good on this item. Also, you don't want to use Coward's Legacy unless you've got some serious solution to the 80% increased effect of vulnerability. It is not enough to use 2 Shaper Rings that have 42% reduced curses and the Yugal Pantheon for 104%, because that will still leave you affected by a 76% effectiveness vulnerability, and you kind of don't want to be under the effect of a 76% effectiveness vulnerability. You're going to want to use this in conjunction with Viridi's Veil and a Magic Ring in your right finger, or you're going to want to use this in conjunction with the Atziri's Reflection Shield, which I didn't mention when we were talking about armors, but it's one of the more expensive shields in the game. Replica Headhunter is next. This is really underrated at the moment. Replica Headhunter is far inferior to the real thing, but it is still a huge upgrade for most builds. Provides a decent chunk of strength, dexterity, and life, and it also has this 20% chance to gain a bunch of mods from magic monsters. This just really adds up. This is far inferior to the real thing, but it is probably better than any other belt on most builds. for the purposes of map clearing, because magic monsters are kind of everywhere, and you'll often have a pack of, 16 of them, so you'll be able to pick up a lot of mods and just run through the map with them all. Torrent's Reclamation is still strong after it was nerfed after it was recently nerfed from 20% to 10% in the Greater Harbinger of Time skill. It's still in a really good spot, and it's still really good. Next up is Bear's Girdle, which is best in slot for most builds that are using Rage in various ways. Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is an Ashabi drop. Very, very strong item, and something that is quite hard to get your hands on. The next thing that comes up is Uzaza's Valley, and this is obviously not a strong item. This is one of the various rings that are fed to the vendor recipe for precursor emblems. So there's an Uzaza's Meadow, an Uzaza's Mountain, and Uzaza's Valley, and there is also the same for Akili and something else. Putembo are the other ones. So Putembo, Akili, and Uzaza. There's a meadow, a mountain, and a valley. When you vendor 3 of them, you will get a Precursor's emblem, and the ones of these that drop only from all the Crystal King. So that's Uzaza's Valley, that is the Putembo's Mountain, and one other, I think. Those 3 of them, so that'd be Achilles Meadow would be the other one. Those 3 are the most expensive, and they provide the best upgrades to your Precursor's emblem. I do intend to do a video on Precursor's emblems, why they're good, what to look for on them, but that will be an extensive one because there's still a whole bunch of extra research to do on that. Lastly, you've got a couple of things that drop from Breach as well. You've got the Pandemonious and Zoph's Blood, which are just really good for specific builds, and Badge of the Brotherhood is in the same rarity tier as the previously mentioned Asenath's Gentle Touch, but it being a drop anywhere unique, it's just a lot more common than it was back in the days when it used to be 50 exalts plus. Flasks wise, basically all of the flasks that drop from the new content have collapsed in price. It really is just a case of Bottled Faith and Soul Ripper being the expensive ones, with Bottled Faith being the main one. A lot of the other flasks that are still really good, like Dying Sun is still really, really, really good. Taste of Hate is really, really, really good. These have become cheaper over the league, and they're sort of quite affordable to an average player. Not necessarily to someone that's just breaking into maps, but they'll be available by the time you've run 100 maps, and so that's really good to be able to pick those up. Oros Resolve has collapsed in price. This is the one that stops your ward from breaking during the flask effect. This was really expensive early on. I think I remember seeing it at 25 to 30 exalts at the start of the league. It seems like it didn't sell very much, and it's now really collapsed in price. And it may fall even further. I just think people have decided this isn't worth trying to build around. It's a fun item, but not a very good one. Unique jewels-wise, of course, we have the super expensive Super Chase Delirium uniques. Voices 1, Voices 3, and also Voices 5 is still pretty expensive from memory. Though, where is Voices 5 on the list? Here it is, Voices 5, 5 exalts or so. So those make up most of the top jewels price-wise. You have the various Labyrinth jewels that are exclusive to the, I believe exclusive to the Eternal Labyrinth now. These jewels are ones that used to be given out for the fastest lab completion. That finally got changed recently because basically you couldn't win that unless you lived in Texas, which was the optimal place to live in order to be able to do that. So that system finally got overhauled, and now it's less ping dependent than it used to be, as it's more about just dumb luck, but these are super expensive when they do drop. Unnatural Instinct, of course, super expensive item, super powerful. The Divination card Love Through Ice is very rare, but there's enough copies of it going around that it is suppressing the price of this item. This is the sort of item that could be 25, 30 exalts if that Divination card didn't exist. And this is a really strong drop anywhere item. One thing that's interesting though is that a number of the really good unique jewels that are being used a lot, when we get to the ones that are being used the most, you'll see that Intuitive Leap is much cheaper than its popularity might suggest. Even though it's sort of increased in price recently, it's only a bit over an exalt, and this is a really strong jewel that is being used by a lot of high-level players. Inspired Learning is also really cheap this league. This is another sort of budget alternative to Headhunter, although unlike Replica Headhunter, this can stack with the real thing. Inspired Learning is really good, especially in a couple of places on the passive tree, And so, especially around the Trickster area. And so when I say Trickster, I mean Shadow area. Around the Shadow area, there's a couple of really good spots for it, but this jewel is phenomenal. Otherwise, there's no real surprises. You've got the three incursion jewels are getting more expensive because they all share an upgrade item to them, and that upgrade item is pretty rare. And additionally, well, I guess one thing that might be a surprise is that the Nightmare jewels, the upgraded Chayula jewels, are actually very, very cheap this league, as are all of the Timeless jewels. Okay, so that's the prices. That's the stuff that's expensive in the Trade League. But do keep in mind that doesn't necessarily mean that these things are good for your build. Something like Emperor's Mastery or especially Replica Bated Breath can be expensive just because there's 3 of them on the server and there's 10 wealthy players that want them. That makes for very expensive items. On the flip side, though, some of the items in this list are expensive because they are in, they're not super rare, but they are in hot demand. So let's have a look next at the items that are being widely used in the trade-enabled softcore version of the league. The most widely used item for Uniques is Watcher's Eye, but ultimately the Watcher's Eye is actually 160,000 different items. So I don't really want to go into this other than to say that if you are at the point in progression where you've got 10 or 15 exalts to your name, you absolutely should be looking to trade for a basic Watcher's Eye, something that will work on your build, because it will be an upgrade over a rare jewel. And then later on, if you decide to play to the point that you've got 200, 300, 500, 2,000 exalts in currency, then at that point you can trade for a superior Watcher's Eye as well. But for the I think most players, once you've got 5 exalts to your name, you should look for some basic Watcher's Eye, at least assuming that you're using some auras. Thread of Hope is the most used non-Watcher's Eye unique. This is the Annulus. This is the Annulus jewel, so this allows you put it into a jewel socket and then it nominates an Annulus size around that one, and any passive that fits into that Annulus, or at least at the center of it is within it, you can allocate it without it being connected to your tree. Thread of Hope has a drawback in that it gives you a penalty to ally resists, and also a Divine Orb will reroll both mods. So it will reroll the size of the Annulus, and it will also reroll the drawback to the elemental resistances. There's also a divination card, which I've heard reports drops from Uber Elder, although I've never seen it myself, called the Gulf, and that drops a 2 implicit Crangled Thread of Hope. Because the Val implicits are really strong on jewels in general, even though this locks the Thread of Hope, it makes it immune to Divine Orbs, it can still end up giving you a really, really good jewel. And that's actually one of those divination cards that's really strong to turn in. Next up, of course, is Rumi's Concoction. Best flask in the game still. This was the best flask in the game, well, at least from a defensive perspective, before the 3.15 nerfs. It got hit hard by those nerfs, but it is still arguably the best defensive flask in the game. Block is just so powerful, especially when you're getting so much of it from a single flask slot. And yeah, this item is just incredibly good. Intuitive Leap comes next. I mentioned before that Intuitive Leap is like an Exalt and a quarter at the moment in the Trade League, and it's fairly rare. I believe it to be the same rarity as Chevron's Wrappings. So it's not as rare as Rizlatha's Coil or Asenath's Gentle Touch, but it is pretty rare. And it lets you allocate points without pathing to them. Essentially, what Intuitive Leap and Thread of Hope are so popular for is that both of them enable you to save passive points. These 2 jewels got a lot better when cluster jewels were added to the game, because saving a few passive points now provides more of a payoff than it did before cluster jewels were introduced. And so that should give you a bit of a sense as to why they're so popular. Bolt of Faith is next. This item has been nerfed, but it is still really, really good, going to show that it can still be an absolute extreme chase item, despite the nerfs that it's had. And then we have the really interesting one, the Overflowing Chalice. This was a leave it on the ground flask for all of the game up until recently. But the fact that it has the 50 to 100% increased charges gained by other flasks during the effect of Overflowing Chalice means that it unlocks a number of shenanigans that you can do, whereby you can have Overflowing Chalice and then other flasks that have a trigger to repeat this flask when this flask expires. And then Overflowing Chalice feeds you enough additional charges that you can conceivably use that. So that's the reason that this item is good. It's previously been bad, but it is because of the triggers on flasks that you can get now, that this has gone from one of the worst flasks in the game that a lot of people just saw as a bit of a meme item, to something that is genuinely full of promise, as the item's flavor text says. Dying Sun goes to show that nerfing an item doesn't take it out of the equation. It's still really good. Taste of Hate also goes to show that nerfing an item doesn't knock it out. As is Promise. Again, so many of these flasks have remained really popular and really powerful. And it sort of shows just how incredibly strong they were prior to 3.15, that they're still among the items that are most used by the highest level characters in the game now. Conqueror's Efficiency comes up next. This is one of those pesky ones that drops as a quest reward in Act 8, and 3% reduced mana cost of skills with 2% reduced reservation is huge. Then you got the 4% increased skill effect duration as well. Conqueror's Efficiency is really good, and it is the fact that you've got 2% reduced reservation is worth a jewel on its own for some builds, and obviously only gets better in conjunction with more of the same stat. So this is a really strong item. Also, the replica of this will find the list is a little bit further down the line, but is also really widely used. The only timeless jewel that makes it into the top sort of 15 or 20 uniques being used in trade-enabled softcore is Glorious Vanity. And then we come down to Headhunter, which everyone, not everyone, but most players would use if they could acquire it, but Headhunter is extremely rare and extremely expensive. And then we've got a few build enablers like Fortress Covenant that are really, really strong, but that are not something that every build wants. And Lionized Vision is very widely used on Spectral Shield throw characters. Progressing down, you've got a few other build enablers like Rain of Splinters, which is just incredible on Forbidden Right totems. Might of the Meek, which is best friends forever with the Unnatural Instinct, which will be a little bit lower down the list. And there's just a whole bunch of other just general good stuff. Viridi's Veil is the top Maven unique, and this item will become used more when it falls further in price. Viridi's Veil has been one of those items that's done really well out of the 3.15 changes in general. It seems like it's just in a really good spot currently. Okay, so now having a look over to Solo Self-Found Hardcore, you'll find that the list of items here is going to be heavily skewed in favor of easily acquired items, and will also be heavily skewed away from items that are gated behind difficult bosses. So for that reason, you will see that an item like the Crown of the Inward Eye is only being used by 0.3% of players in this game mode. That's because beating Cirrus is challenging, and beating him and then not losing the Crown of the Inward Eye to a random death later is also challenging. And so there's a lot of people avoid Cirrus in SSF Hardcore until they're at the point of being quite late in the league. And you'll notice that Lionized Remorse is the dominant unique here, Lionized Vision, a lot of things that are just being used by people in the Gladiator Ascendancy. Some interesting things though, people often want Chaos Resistance in Solo Self-Found Hardcore, and in Hardcore in general, and Death Rush has been an item that was once League specific. It's now available in the general item drop pool, and it's pretty common as well. Because it provides life, a lot of Chaos Resistance, and a useful utility effect in the you gain onslaught for 4 seconds on kill. Death Rush is a really popular unique to use, and it's the number 4 item in Solo Self-Found Hardcore. Tabula Rasa and Lionized Vision are the chest armors that are most popular by far. And if we have a look by the specific slots, you'll see that amulets, it's really just the Spectre players that are playing the Jinx Juju, but they're a tiny percentage of the player base. There's really not many people using unique amulets at all. From a belt perspective, Soul Tether for defense is really popular. Defense and also just Life Leech. It's a really good item. And then there's just nothing else being used in any widespread way other than Belt of the Deceiver. Torso Armor, we've already mentioned Lionize and Tabula. Then it's Belly of the Beast, Soul Mantle on the Forbidden Right characters. But Soul Mantle's not rare, but it's not common either. I think it might be like 3 times rarer than Tabula or Lionized Vision. So lots of players who would like to use it probably don't have it. And also a lot of players have decided not to play the Forbidden Right Totems build in this game mode because they just haven't got one. In terms of boots, it's just general good stuff that's being used. So 3-step Assault is common and good. Atzuri's Step is a little bit trickier to get your hands on, but is just so powerful that a lot of people will want to use it. but most people in this mode are using a rare set of boots instead. Flasks, there's a lot less, surprisingly, a lot less people using Rumi's Concoction than I would have expected. Rumi's Concoction is not common, but I was expecting it to be a little bit more common than this because I tend to find a bunch of them drop for me over a league. So I would have thought that a lot of people would have it. Forbidden Taste is really interesting. This is an item that requires you to have Chaos Resistance now, but even though it got nerfed in terms of its statistics in this league, it is so much better than it's been in the past. So in the past, it had the same text it has now, which is recover 75 to 100% of your maximum life on use. It's a quartz flask. And then it used to have 8% of maximum life taken as chaos damage per second. Well, what was changed was that 8% was nerfed to 25%. So it seems like Forbidden Taste is in a worse place than it used to be. But why it's not is because you can now have this set up to trigger on you suffering a Savage Hit. So Savage Hit is a hit that reduces your life total by 15% or more. And so the instant you take a Savage Hit, you can then immediately drink your Forbidden Taste. And whilst you're going to be in a bit of trouble afterwards, because you're taking all that chaos damage as well, you will be instantly back to full life. This is the sort of item that I would definitely consider building around in hardcore if you can get the chaos resistance somewhere. Then we really just got a bunch of the other flasks are just pretty rare, so they're not being used all that much. In the glove slot, the rare gloves are just so good that there's just nothing much. People are using Triad Grip if they're playing a minion build, and that's really about it. Helmet-wise, again, nothing stands out at all. Stuck Conjures is just an item that is common and good, but that's really it. Jewels-wise, it's all about the various threshold jewels, and that's because they can be target farmed by just, well, not target farmed, but acquired deterministically by leveling a character to level 5 to Act 5 and getting the quest reward there, the one that you care about for your build. Quivers are basically not being used at all. Rings, it's all about Death Rush, and there's nothing else that's popular. Shield, it's all Lionized Remorse, nothing else of note. And then weapons, it's Prismatic Eclipse with a number of people using Cold Iron Point. People that are using Cold Iron Point, I think you'll find it's Exsanguinate builds, and those Exsanguinate builds could be Trappers or Miners. It actually seems like they're all Trappers, pretty much. I was considering league starting Exsanguinate Mines, and it would be something I would play if I was playing hardcore solo self-found, but I'd be playing it as Mines, but Traps will work as well. Okay, so that's a quick overview, well, quickish overview of the uniques that are doing well in this league. If you've got comments or questions, definitely fire away below. I will put links down in the description below so that you can see these various things on PoE.Ninja and get a sense of how things evolve over the duration of the rest of the league. But I'm going to leave it there. May your Valorps have interesting results, and I will see you around.